Hello, welcome back to another episode of A Weekly Waypoint, Take 2. Today we are playing the Crew Motorfest again because my brain has decided that the worms thing is boring, so we will be continuing that retrospective when my brain has stopped throwing a little bit of a tantrum. I say Take 2 because the first round of this commentary was completely scatterbrained, and so I'm going to try and organize my thoughts into some sort of cohesive membrane. Membrane's not the correct word, but let's keep it in the video anyway. We will start with what we are playing. Yes, we are continuing to play the Crew Motorfest, as with last week. We today are going to be taking a small tour of the open world instead of doing like a multiplayer grand race, because I kind of want to show off that while this isn't America to scale like it was in previous games, it is still a fairly decent chunk of open world to go and explore. And so I thought I would do that by circling the edges of the open world map. However, I don't know if that necessarily gave a very good impression of the scale of the world. All the same, it's fun footage, so here it is. It's a little bit scuffed because I couldn't find like an event that just did the outskirts of the island, and so I kind of tried to do it with waypoints and stuff, but I had to keep changing the waypoints as I went because it doesn't understand if you put a waypoint somewhere that you want to go all the way around instead of taking the most efficient route to get there, that kind of thing. And also, I'm a very bad driver, so you will be seeing me crash terribly several times. Towards the end, I just kind of stopped caring and thought I had enough footage anyway, but turns out I didn't, so there's lots of very painful looking crashes. Before we get to which games I played this week, the main thing I want to talk to you about this week is how finishing the Wheel of Time series affected me. Because while this time last week I had already finished the series, I had recorded my own videos on that. If you want to see full spoiler thoughts for A Memory of Light, we have a video for that. If you want to hear non-spoiler thoughts about finishing a 14-book long epic fantasy series, that is also available to you. But what so far has not been available to you is an in-depth dive into what finishing the Wheel of Time did for me during this week, because there is a term among people who enjoy reading books called post-series depression. Kind of, you know, it's not that serious, don't worry about it, but you know, when you finish something you've been reading for 3.5 years, it leaves you with a certain sense of emptiness, or something is missing, or, you know, like, I've been hanging out with these characters for 3.5 years and now there's no more of them to read, and that does things to a human brain. The first thing I did is something that I had been promising myself since I started this series, which is I went and I looked up videos about the Wheel of Time, knowing that I could no longer be spoiled on the events, and of course I'm not going to spoil anything here. But in so doing, I found some really fun kind of like behind the scenes like live streams of interviews with like Brandon Sanderson and what it was like for him to finish this already established series that's so famous, and you know, what was him, what was Robert Jordan, how he worked with Robert Jordan's notes and a kind of like team around him, but also kind of like secrets, because it's been 10 years or more since A Memory of Light came out, so he was happy to come out and be like, so yeah, this character, you know, some people have been theorizing this about them. I'm happy to come out now and say that yes, this is the truth, or that this is my non-canon interpretation of what would happen after the events of the series, that kind of thing. I've been watching a ton of those kinds of videos, and it's been nectar for the brain. And so the natural thing after that was to discover BookTube, which is, I don't know if people still use that term, but just kind of like YouTubers who talk mostly about books. In my case, YouTubers who talk mostly about sci-fi and fantasy books. I almost said sci-fiction, and then I realized I was being a silly doofus. Most prominently, I discovered Daniel Green's channel. If he's fairly popular, so you may have heard of him, but he basically focuses on fantasy books, but also speculative fiction in general, which is a term that's growing in popularity to just kind of mean science fiction and fantasy, but also like horror and maybe historical fiction, and you know, just kind of like fringe bits of subgenre. And isn't it a lovely feeling when you discover a YouTuber whose content you love, and then you realise you've got a back catalogue of years of their content to eat up? That's what I've been doing with a lot of my week. And as it turns out, you know, I've been talking about how reading The Wheel of Time has kind of got me back into reading, has kind of you know, nurtured the spark within me to read once again. As it turns out, when all you follow is gaming YouTubers, the main thing you want to do with gaming. If you start following booktubers, you're going to start wanting to read more as well, because influencers are pretty good at influencing you to do things. Isn't that wild? Literally, I'm not even joking, if you want to get back into reading, I would recommend you go and find some YouTubers who talk about the genres of books you like to read, and you will probably end up wanting to read more. I did also do a nice big blog post over on my blog christianrichmond.wordpress.com about how, you know, I kind of fell out of love with reading in my mid-20s and my journey to kind of like fall back in love with reading. The kind of crux of it is I didn't really fall out of love with reading, I just put that energy towards reading adjacent things such as discovering comics, which in itself is something I've discussed at length on the channel before and do not regret doing and kind of want to get back to, but I'm just now getting back into reading. We will let that have the limelight for a little while. But what this did, discovering BookTube and kind of learning about, I guess, the canon landscape of fantasy as it is right now, and, you know, the series which are well regarded and authors which are well regarded in a detail which I had never before dreamt of, is it inspired me to, you know, not just want to read more, but also kind of like create this checklist spreadsheet of all the series which I have even a passing interest in reading, and now I am a little overwhelmed with all of the reading I want to be doing. I am currently reading the Life Ship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb, which is absolutely fantastic, by the way. But the kind of rhythm I've fallen into is having a physical book series, which I'm reading, which is that, and having an audiobook series that I'm listening to, which, for the last 3.5 years at least, has been Wheel of Time. And so the question fell upon me, what next? What do I listen to next? Now that I'm done with Wheel of Time, I've been thinking about this a lot, and there were kind of 3 main directions I could have gone in. I'm not going to spoil them because some of them are directions I still want to go in, and I do plan on recording a nice big long YouTube video later today where I talk about my TBR, where I talk about the books that I want to get around to reading next. But ultimately the audiobook series I landed on for now is Lord of the Rings as narrated by Andy Serkis, because 4 years ago I listened to The Hobbit by Rob Inglis because Andy Serkis had yet to do his, and I really enjoyed it. But just in general, I'm thinking if I am going to go on this big epic fantasy jaunt, I should probably go and read The Father of the Genre first. Indeed, I'm halfway through... Oh, I used the word indeed, that sounds so wanky. I'm halfway through Fellowship of the Ring right now, and I can see a dozen things that Robert Jordan, let's say, took inspiration from. Although what's fascinating about Wheel of Time is it starts off as like a Lord of the Rings inspired book, and then, you know, very quickly splits off and does a whole bunch of its own stuff, which is, I think, really fun. But it's things like, you know, the hobbits live near the Misty Mountains, and then the characters that start at the Wheel of Time, who are going to be our protagonists, live near the Mountains of Mist. I'm like, okay, that's kind of blatant. They both take place in the Third Age, yada yada yada. I'm sure this has been talked about to death. But yeah, for a very long time, I have spent a lot of my gaming time exploring fantasy worlds, and now I want to spend a lot of my reading time doing the very same thing. So I'm halfway through Fellowship of the Ring. I'll have more thoughts on it when I'm done, but there are times when I'm in love with a book, and there are times when I'm in hatred with the book. It's very polarizing for me. But knowing that I will be done with a book long before my next Audible credit shows up, I've also dipped my toe into Elantris, which is just included within the subscription, which is a thing they do now. Elantris is Brandon Sanderson's first ever published book, and let me tell you, it's not quite as good as his stuff. I mean, I'm only a few chapters in, but Brandon Sanderson's books are usually pretty immediately interesting for me, and this one so far is just... I mean, there is one part of it which is a really cool premise, but so far it's just kind of decent, which is pretty low praise for Brandon Sanderson. But yeah, I started Elantris early because there was a particularly slow Fellowship of the Ring chapter, and I went, oh. But yeah, that's my adventures in books after finishing Wheel of Time and what that did to me. That is a far clearer explanation than I gave in take 1, so I'm glad I decided to re-record that. Let's move on to video games. What video games have I been playing this week? Well, the Crew Motorfest. That's one of them. Xbox decided to stealth drop Trials of Mana onto Game Pass, which is probably the most famous entry. I think it's a remake, actually, in the Mana series and that's one of the few JRPG series I've yet to really look into. So I was like, you know what, I'm not going to think about it too much. I'm not going to say I'm already playing these games and I'm going to wait till I'm done playing these games, etc, etc, etc. I'm just going to download it and play it. And I'm about 3 or 4 hours in, maybe a little bit longer, and yeah, I'm having a great time. For those of you who do not know, Trials of Mana is an action RPG as opposed to turn-based, which a lot of these are, and it's charmingly simplistic so far. You've got these characters who have backstories which are pretty simple. You've got a combat system which is so far pretty gosh dang simple as well. You've got this world which feels quite small in comparison to some of these sprawling epic fantasy worlds in the genre. So I don't know, hopefully there's room for growth, but I think it might be indicative of the fact that this game might not be 100 hours long. Basically, it's no Dragon Quest XI. I'm reminded of my time trying Trials of Arise, which is the only Trials of game I've ever played so far, in terms of, you know, it's a JRPG, but it's action-based instead of turn-based. However, compared to Trials of Arise, compared to Tales of Arise, Trials of Mana is much less difficult. My main issue with Trials of Arise, oh my god, was the boss fights were really fucking hard, and the only advice I could find online to deal with it was just get good. I did never bat down the difficulty settings, so that could have been a problem. If I was less stubborn, maybe I would have had a better time with that game. But anyway, Trials of Mana, which is the game we're talking about so far, has been, you know, charmingly simplistic and fairly easy and just cozy and nice. You should give it a go if you got Game Pass. The other main game that's worth talking about this week that I've spent a decent amount of time in is old school RuneScape. That's right, it's old school RuneScape season. We're back in RuneScape. Obviously the last MMO I've been playing before this is World of Warcraft. I've been spending less time in World of Warcraft. I don't know if I'm going to let that fade out into the background entirely though, because there is a really cool 20th anniversary patch coming out soon. But for now, I've been playing old school RuneScape, and let me tell you why. I was getting the itch for RuneScape, and I just decided life's short, just freaking resub. And I saw that they were raising the price of a yearly Premier membership from £60 to £75, and I thought, instead of letting FOMO bite me and grabbing the £60 while I can, I'm just going to grab the 1 month of subscription, because I am wise. And wise people don't save money. Now, I know I usually don't make full use of a 12-month subscription based on the waxing and waning of my interest in the game. The reason this is relevant is because when you have a Premier membership, you have more bank space, and this isn't something I really thought about until I didn't have it, and suddenly I had to get rid of a bunch of stuff in my RuneScape free bank, and that very quickly turned me off of the game. But I thought, I have a month's subscription, what am I going to do with it? So I decided to turn to old school RuneScape instead. And yeah, it's been a blast. It's been a good thing to play while I've been listening to my audiobooks, of course. Although I think Colouring Pixels might still be the perfect game for audiobooks, because it's more active than RuneScape is in terms of clicking, and yet it still uses like 2% of your brain. Obviously, you'll see what I've been up to in-game eventually when I come out with a new Adventures in Old School Gillinor, but all the same, worth mentioning, I hadn't been doing too much in that game, just been doing stuff like, you know, motherload mines, so working on my unlocks in there and that kind of thing, doing some agility. But, you know, I did some Slayer last night, that was fun. I did a quest. Oh, we've got new quest content coming out in the video series, look forward to that. What quest could it be? Just what did I do? All I will say is it was definitely the result of yet another, okay, I want this, and to do this, I need to do this, 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 to do... You know, the usual kind of Iron Man, Bronze Man problem-solving exercise. I also played a little more Horizon Zero Dawn, but not as much as I would have liked to, just because other games and, you know, reading and stuff like that definitely took up a lot of my free time, and yeah, I kind of let Trials of Mana overwrite Horizon Zero Dawn as like my, I'm gonna go play an RPG part of my brain. I feel like I owe it to myself to mention that the main reason that I scrapped the commentary for the first take of this video is because I spent an inordinate amount of time ranting about basically stuff I've talked about on here before, which is what's probably going to turn out to be ADHD. I pointed to both the Worms retrospective and the Guild Wars 1 Let's Play as things which were frustrating me, because they were things that when I set out to start them, I was really interested and excited to do them, and yet when I went to continue them this week, I just found them to be incredibly dull projects. And of course linking that to like, well, you know, successful projects on YouTube are people who can stick to a thing. And I've been thinking as well with Animal Crossing, something I would like to do is do like you know, non-commentary, but just like recording my gameplay of playing it every day and uploading it. And that's something that sounds really appealing to me, but would be a massive amount of work, and I know I would burn out on doing it really quickly, especially since, you know, it was 2 weekly waypoints ago now that I talked about Animal Crossing and how excited I was to be playing the original version, but it's been over a week since I touched that save file, and now I'm just like, well, my town is going to have weeds and half my neighbours are going to have moved out, I'm sure. That being said, expect a video of my experiences with my first free in-game days in Animal Crossing coming out later this week. Something I'm considering doing with Animal Crossing is just altering the game clock so that I can advance a day, one single day, every time I go back to playing the game. This does mean, however, I would see events like Halloween and Christmas at random times during the year. The seasons would very quickly fall out of sync and be wrong. I'm kind of weighing the benefits and the drawbacks of such an endeavour. Oh god, such an endeavour, who am I? But yeah, I think those are the two main problems I've been finding this week, is both, one, I want to do all of the things, and if I focus on a single thing, then I'm not doing the 99 other things I also want to be doing, and therefore I don't want to be doing the single thing I've chosen. And two, many of the creative projects I was really excited to start suddenly taste like ashes in my mouth. Who knows what could be the problem there? It's ADHD, but I don't have the spare £500 to go and get diagnosed, so we're still waiting on that 5-year waiting list. But that's enough of the doom and gloom. What I'm trying to focus on is just that I have so many fun things ahead of me to play and read and experience, and I will get there in my own gosh dang time, and finishing the Wheel of Time is evidence of that. Thank you so much for watching this episode of A Weekly Waypoint. I hope you had a good time. I have tried to do my best to make sure that this video doesn't look quite as muddy as last week's, but there is only so much I can do, unfortunately, with YouTube's processing. Anyway, I will catch you in the next one. Wait, hang on, we gotta watch this sick drift. Okay, cool, we're done.